Dr. Flowers has been very supportive the last couple of years. Have been just a whirlwind. When you start a new nonprofit, it's tough. I'm telling you, it's really tough, and we could not have gotten to where we are without your support. So her list is long, and I cannot pronounce all the things that she has done and is qualified to do, but I would just say thank you, Dr. Flowers. And is there anything else that you'd like to say? Please do. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Amanda Flowers.
Thank you. I will say it's truly an honor to stand here before you today as we talk about the history of our people and our communities and the museum's current and future initiatives. I will say David is one of my most favorite people in the world. There are times we talk every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, and working with this stuff, and I always laugh because I'm like, there's nobody in the world I talk to more than David than my mom. So I talk to you like I talk to my mom, but he is such a pleasure to work with. So thank you for your introduction, but I want to say that, to everyone as well. Very easygoing and just wants to do the right thing for everyone. So I appreciate being on your board.
Thank you.
So the Tablertown People of Color Museum, a nonprofit social enterprise located in Athens County, is dedicated to preserving the community's history and culture. David Butcher, the executive director, founded the museum in 2018 as a semblance of honor for his family heritage and lineage. As a young boy, Mr. Butcher confided in his grandma, Elsie Tabler, that the Black history taught in school was negative and depressing. All that was reinforced was that his ancestors were slaves. His grandmother gave him a tintype photo of his great-great-grandfather, Jerry Sims, and shared stories about how he was a Civil War veteran. From that moment forward, Mr. Butcher was inspired to grow his early collection of cultural artifacts and learn more about the history of Tablertown and its early descendants. With a desire to ensure his descendants are represented accurately and to dismantle stereotypes by increasing pride in family lineage, Mr. Butcher was mentored by his uncle Alvin Adams, the namesake of Ohio University's Adams Hall, and in 2003, they started sharing their cultural collection and family history more publicly through an exhibit they curated at the Kennedy Museum of Art at Ohio University. In the 1600s and 1700s, Europeans traveled the Atlantic Ocean with hope to settle on North American soil and advance their economic interest. At this time, the agrarian way of life in America's antebellum South was heinously built upon the transatlantic slave trade. In 1732, father and son, Leonard and Melchior, Dobler, set sail from Germania, now known as Germany, on a boat called the Samuel. They arrived in what is present-day Pennsylvania, obtained land from the British Crown, and settled in Virginia near what is now Berkeley County, West Virginia. By 1736, the spelling of their last name had changed to Tabler, and they started growing their family plantations of enslavement. A couple of generations later, Melchior's grandson, Michael Tabler, born in 1774, became infatuated with a girl named Hannah, who was born into enslavement on their family plantation in 1775. Michael's father, George, disapproved of this interest and attempted to keep them separated by selling Hannah to another Tabler plantation. In 1813, Michael purchased Hannah back from his sister's plantation and between 1810 and 1816, he fathered 6 children to Hannah, 5 sons and 1 daughter: John, Jesse, Michael, Isaac, William, and Maria. Could you imagine her with all those brothers? Regardless of the perceived relationships at the time, the enslaved were considered the legal property and laborers of plantation owners. So Hannah and her biracial children were also perceived as such. Thus, as Hannah labored as the plantation housekeeper and caretaker of Michael's mother, he realized their enslaved children would have difficulty claiming their family inheritance. Upon his mother's death around 1827, his father George provided documentation to grant Hannah her freedom. Then in 1830, Michael went to Wheeling, Virginia, and filed for the emancipation of their children because of the affection for which he had of them. Still, Virginia laws not only made it difficult for the formerly enslaved to remain in the state, but they were forbidden to inherit a white man's property. In turn, Michael, Hannah, and their children, who were now between the ages of 14 and 20, moved to Federalton in Athens County in the Free State of Ohio. It is speculated that Michael may have chosen this area as a safe place to settle, given its central location to active Underground Railroad networks in surrounding towns such as Albany, Athens, Amesville, Cutler, and Chester Hill. Revolutionary War veteran Francis Munn sold Michael 50 acres of land in Federalton, and Michael gave each of his children their own plot of farmland. In 1835, Michael also purchased the Barrows Mill, one of the first mills built in Ohio and the first grist and sawmill in the area. It is unknown whether Michael and Hannah were ever officially married, but they are assumed to have lived as man and wife in what came to be known as Tablertown until his death in 1834. At the same time as America grew its system of enslavement, coal mining has started taking place, and racial tension crossed those industrial lines as well. Even following the Civil War, while Appalachia did not present a distinctive culture of segregation in comparison to the Cotton Belt South, it was no Eden free from racial prejudice and economic discrimination. Just as black people had been the axis of the agrarian wheel, they became the vanguard of an industrial working class in logging, steel, coal mining, and salt mining. In fact, there were highly visible black enclaves in industrial towns that came to dominate the region between World War I and the Great Depression, and that was between the years of 1914 and 1939. Of all the commercial contributors to the industrialization of America, the coal industry was known for its historically central role as an economic activity and for being one of the earliest and major employers of black Americans. Consequently, black Appalachian coal mining became the focus of union organizing efforts, and we played an important role in the regional coal mining union movement. So, at this same time, as years had passed by, Tablertown grew their booming coal mining, iron ore, and railroading industries too. Multiple coal mines were in operation for over a century, including the Jackson Mine, which was operated by Oliver Coal Company and abandoned in 1932, as well as the Lee Jenkins Coal Mine, which was operated by Lee T. Jenkins and abandoned in 1954. Some mines were black-owned, and several of Tablertown's mine workers were black, many of whom were outcasts and not welcome in other communities because of their skin color and heritage. Initially, coal was transported in Tablertown by horse and wagon, but by 1850, it was also transported by the Columbus and Hawking Railroad. This significantly changed the town's landscape in terms of both population and topography. However, Tablertown's status as a thriving coal mining hub came to an end in the mid-20th century when the closure of coal mines devastated the local economy. By the time the last coal mine closed, mines dotted the hillside facing Federal Creek, and the last truckload of coal left Tablertown around 1950, leaving behind a legacy of polluted land and water, as well as cemeteries filled with miners who had died prematurely. The decline of coal mining not only affected the residents of Tablertown, but also those from neighboring communities such as Cutler and Chester Hill, who had also worked in these mines. This downturn left Tablertown isolated with limited resources, and the town has never fully recovered from its loss. Over time, as the coal mines dried up, the railroads also ceased operation, and then a tornado hit Tablertown in 1937. Referred to as a cyclone by locals because it carried water, the storm destroyed everything in Tablertown except 1.5 buildings, which were a house and a store. 4 people were killed, including a 12-year-old boy, and several residents were forced to move and repair their lives in neighboring, oftentimes historical Underground Railroad towns, such as Cutler and Chester Hill. I talk about them because we're kind of like the little triangle. And we also work together with them, as you'll hear when we move further along in the presentation. But it is noteworthy that Tablertown was never established as an official name, and a local coal miner, a white man by the name of Sam Kilvert, took advantage of this and visited the courthouse to ensure the town's official name would become Kilvert. However, David Butcher recently led a petition, and after all of these years, the town has legally regained its original name of Tablertown. Unfortunately, though, the community's losses from the cyclone added to those from the downturn of the coal mining and railroading industries, and Tablertown has long suffered economic deprivation. The village currently consists of a church, community center, cemeteries, and a few homes, and down the road, in a modest pole barn next to the log cabin that David Butcher calls home, the community's legacy is preserved in the Tablertown People of Color Museum. Until the latter stages of the 20th century, Black American history and culture had been scrubbed from the historical record, considered a blight on what many believed was the pristine record of American growth and prosperity. Even now, honestly, just a mere snapshot of our history, heritage, and legacy is captured in mainstream education and tourism. And while the Black experience as a whole has been excluded from much of America's story, the experiences of Black Appalachians have historically been rendered invisible. Given our unique culture is not well documented, much of our story perishes with our ancestors. Many of our customs and traditions that have survived to the present day did so by means of oral discovery and interpretation passed down through the generations. This narrow approach to historic preservation has been crucial for many of today's advances in the cultural and heritage tourism product. And this is exactly what David Butcher has started through the Tablertown People of Color Museum. The goal has been to change the standard by preserving the intersections of Black, Appalachian, and Ohio history. So the Tablertown People of Color Museum showcases cultural artifacts that tell many stories of Appalachian diversity and chronicles the history of Tablertown from its time of early settlement to the present day. Exhibits include an impressive collection of Native American arrowheads found on David Butcher's farm, some determined by archaeologists to be 10,000 to 15,000 years old. Of course, Tablertown's coal mining and railroading history is reflected through multiple displays. Family lineages are highlighted through a diverse family tree and an array of heirlooms, including handmade quilts dating back to the 1870s, a basket made by Mr. Butcher's seventh great-grandmother, and glass displays of photos, toys, and household items, such as a jar of his grandmother's homemade canned hog meat. That's one of my favorite things. Local veterans, including several black soldiers who served in every American war, are honored through exhibits of military memorabilia, including pictures, uniforms, medals, pistols, cannonballs, and a handmade wooden leg that Mr. Butcher's uncle used after losing that limb in World War I. One of our key features is Milton Holland, who was the only Athens Countyan awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor during the Civil War. He was born into enslavement in Texas, moved to Ohio once freed, joined the 5th United States Colored Infantry Regiment of the Union Army, rose to the rank of Sergeant Major, and then led the black troops to victory. Sergeant Holland was promoted to captain, but the commission was refused by the War Department based on grounds of his race. The Tablertown People of Color Museum also hosts community tours, which include visits to the Kilvert Church, which took 9 years to rebuild after the cyclone, and visits to the Kilvert Cemetery, where the founding tablers are buried. Another spotlight is Pioneer Cemetery, Athens County's oldest non-native cemetery, where manures were carved on the earliest gravestones. Pioneer Cemetery is also the home of Ohio's second oldest shagbark hickory tree. I almost call it a history tree. It is a history tree. And one of our upcoming initiatives is to preserve our historical documents, such as photographs and maps, birth, marriage, and death certificates, military records, land and deed records, and the writings of one of Tablertown's past matriarchs, Irene Flowers, who operated the community center for years and spent her days caring for others by quilting and crocheting, cooking, baking, canning, making apple butter, and hosting food giveaways, and organizing community events such as Tablertown's Pioneer Day. Mr. Butcher's ultimate goal is to build a world-class museum in the heart of Tablertown, where the Tabler family first settled, on a hillside harboring a portion of the abandoned Lee Jenkins coal mine and overlooking where trains transported coal across Federal Creek. This land housed Irene Flowers' former home, where many of us spent our childhood days. The southeastern Ohio region has long suffered from disinvestment, generational poverty, and over-reliance on extractive industries like coal mining. Focusing on creating economic diversification opportunities, the new world-class Tablertown People of Color Museum will act as a cultural hub of interest and activity, drawing individuals to Tablertown to explore the historic sites in the area, as well as examining the connections between coal mining and the often undiscussed history of the people of color in this region, will be two of the great assets of having this museum. And we've been actively applying for grant funding to build this dynamic museum that will have ample space for exhibits, tours, lectures, community events, and a gift shop, as well as a destination venue for weddings, reunions, business meetings, art shows, and music events. We aim to further interpret and incorporate the industrial history of the coal mining in southeastern Ohio, as well as display and promote the cultural history of the formerly enslaved seeking freedom in southeastern Ohio. We plan to incorporate multimedia technologies into the exhibits and learning events, which will furnish a richer interactive experience and enhanced information dissemination through diverse formats such as virtual reality and augmented reality and other related technologies. And this will facilitate more intuitive and immersive interactions between visitors in each of our exhibits and projects. We will act as a center for cultural activity far and wide, offering outreach and engagement for youth and adults alike. Our educational program will engage not only the region's historical narratives, but also connect with other museums and cultural centers to expand the visibility of arts and culture and explore the impacts of technology on the ever-changing society. Once constructed, this state-of-the-art museum will create permanent jobs in Tablertown, support an emerging cultural heritage tourism economy, and develop a sense of pride in the community that will strengthen local infrastructure and act as a critical draw for regional development. Our economic and community development activities will undoubtedly result in positive outcomes, but our initiatives don't stop there. When the system of enslavement was brought to America, it varied according to regions in Appalachia. In the absence of a plantation economy directly in Appalachia, yet during a time of intense race relations, a different sort of social contact was created between the races in Appalachia. Black Appalachians often found themselves caught in a pinch between the pro-slavery and anti-slavery movements of the Upper South, while the region's West Embark, Ohio, and Northern Tip, Pennsylvania, were considered free states. As enslavement became entrenched in the South, many Black people in Appalachia were forced out to the plantation region. And while enslavement in Appalachia did not always fit the Southern model, it existed in every Appalachian county south of the Mason-Dixon line or the Ohio River. In fact, it was said that some Appalachian mountaineers acquired a hatred and contempt for Black people that was even more violent than that of the common whites of the lowlands in the Cotton Belt South. A dislike so rabid that it was a Black person's life to venture into many mountain sections. Everywhere that enslavement existed, there was also resistance through escape and flight, as well as deliberate efforts to liberate the enslaved from bondage. Underground railroad networks existed throughout the country, including Appalachian routes extending from Chattanooga to the Ohio Valley and Pennsylvania. Although Ohio had their fair share of racial tension too, Southeast Ohio, nestled along the Ohio River and bordering the slave state Virginia, now West Virginia, became one of the first safe havens for those fleeing enslavement. In turn, the enslaved began escaping to what would become the Ohio country as late as the mid-1700s, and those enslaved in the Upper South in places such as Virginia and Kentucky started to escape from their plantations in increasing numbers around 1808. While steamboats appeared on the Ohio River in 1811, like the river itself, they were regulated by the South and fugitive slave laws were enforced on their decks. Enslavers and buyers rode them north to auction blocks in Virginia towns such as Parkersburg, St. Mary's, and Wheeling, and the human chattel were forced to ride back south. By 1814 or 1815, a formal Underground Railroad was conceived in Southeast Ohio, through which waterways such as creeks, streams, and rivers filled with treacherous ice, black water, and heavy river fog were the primary routes for quickly traveling in the Ohio River Basin, as there were no roadways in this forbidding place, which was at this point a wilderness where total darkness permeated the forest even at midday. Almost every river island served as a crossing point, which were often unsettled and overgrown, thus providing dry ground with good cover for hiding in the forest by daylight and traveling at night. As freedom seekers faced being recaptured and returned to southern plantations, they trekked an arduous journey, hoping to encounter a stranger offering shelter and aid, protection from enforcers of fugitive slave laws, and guidance along their long journey that still laid ahead. Ohio, being the closest state to Canada, with roughly 250 miles or less from anywhere along the Ohio River to Lake Erie and Freedom, grew to have one of the most active networks of any other state. Freedom seekers crossed the Ohio River Freedom seekers crossed the Ohio River into southern Ohio in numerous places, and there were several exit ports into Canada at the northern part of the state. Some freedom seekers crossed the Ohio River in Lawrence and Gallia counties, making way north to Oak Hill, Jackson, or Berlin Crossroads in Jackson County, and then through Wilkesville or MacArthur in Vinton County. And I just want to stop there and say something. I want to talk about a project that we have going on, but this section right here is very significant because where this Underground Railroad project in the southern part of the state left off at Lawrence and Gallia counties, and although we tend to be around, the Athens County, Morgan and Washington counties, Jackson and Vinton have some places in there that we were able to get them involved in our project. So now as we're creating a trail, they have it across the southern part of Ohio, and we can directly connect on it to bring up trail, routes and things that that people were taking to get into like Athens County and Washington County and Morgan County and going on up to Perry County too. So, and then after they were leaving Wilkesville and MacArthur in Vinton County, they would be headed towards Albany, Athens, Tablertown, or Amesville and Athens County. And then Washington County offered several active stations after crossing the Ohio and Muskingum rivers. And their connecting terrains were also in places like Little Hocking, Belpre, Constitution, Harmer, Marietta, Newport, or New Matamoras. And these were when they were en route to places like Cutler, Mills Ridge, Bartlett, Barlow, Waterford, Rainbow, Stanleyville, or Lower Salem. And the freedom seekers traveled even further north from both Athens counties and Washington counties into Morgan County, where they might be find safety in places like Chester Hill, Pennsville, Stockport, Malta, McConnellsville, Ringgold, or Deavertown. And then that was before reaching places like Payne's Crossing or Kirksville in Perry County. And when we think about this, this picture that I just said, all of these places that are really, really close to us, this is only the main routes. And there were many small paths and many stories that also existed about our region's journey to freedom that aren't even captured. These are the ones that are more easily accessible. And this map up here actually shows some of those routes that I was talking about. Like if you look at the bottom, that's where they're coming from, Lawrence and Gallia counties, and you can see how they'll head up through Athens County and then more into Morgan County. And then over here is where they come in would cross over the Ohio River in in Washington County, and then head more toward Morgan County, and then up, of course, further north as well. And then in the late 1840s, there were growing stretches of transportation railway lines where trains across southern Ohio connected with the north-south escape routes, including the Ohio and Erie Canal, where it crossed new stream rail lines at Chillicothe and Marietta. And after 1857, it was possible to hop a train in southeast Ohio at places like Athens, Stuart, Cutler, Vincent, or Marietta and ride to freedom. During the Civil War, I know it's impressive, and it's like, this is just one small section of Ohio that we're talking about. But this is home, and no one ever told us this. I mean, we live here, and no one told us this in any of our history classes. And so during the Civil War, in the 1860s, like the nation as a whole, Appalachia was, as a whole, the whole, region, Appalachia region was equally divided by Civil War loyalties. Northern Appalachians joined the Union, Southern Appalachians joined the Confederacy, and those in Central Appalachia were at the crossroads. Some freedom seekers sought protection and liberty by escaping to Union Army lines, while many agents and conductors of Southeast Ohio's Underground Railroad served the Union cause to continue their fight against America's system of enslavement. So, the Tablertown People of Color Museum, along with 5 regional partners, are eager to showcase Southeast Ohio's connected Underground Railroad sites, routes, agents, conductors, and sympathetic neighbors who extended hope, and the brave freedom seekers who partook the journey. We were recently awarded 2 grants, one from the Just Transition Fund and another from the Appalachian Regional Commission, and this was to support our Connecting Black Heritage from Enslavement to Settlement in Southeast Ohio planning project. And what this means when we say planning project is there will be 2 phases of this project. Right now we're in the planning phase of what in the world, how are we going to make our vision come to pass? And for the next year, we'll be getting all those plans together. And then after that, we apply for an implementation grant where we actually put everything to action, put all of our plans to action. And this project couples 5 nonprofit agencies and 1 governmental agency whose all of our members will focus on and plan how, as a region, we can build off existing groundwork. That existing groundwork, I was talking about the trail they already have in Southern Ohio, and provide tourists coming into Southeast Ohio with an opportunity to experience places, artifacts, and activities that authentically represent our story of the Underground Railroad and related Black heritage through the Cultural Heritage Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Development Cluster. And the reason we call this the Underground Railroad and related Black heritage is because we wanted to capture all of these stories from enslavement to settlement. And when we think about stories like the Tabler story and the Tablertown story, that was not a story of the Underground Railroad. That was a different type of story where it went from enslavement to freedom. So I call that kind of like the cousin stories. And then of course we have the traditional Underground Railroad routes, but we wanted to be able to make sure we captured this enslavement to settlement in all types of ways, regardless of how it happened. So that's why we're talking about Underground Railroad and related Black heritage. And specifically, we plan to develop a heritage trail that connects our stories across counties through the identification and registration of sites with the National Park Service's Network to Freedom Marker Program. That's, in other words, their Underground Railroad Marker Program, and how you see historic markers, the brown historic markers put up in different places. These are Underground Railroad markers specific to historical markers specific to Underground Railroad sites. And then we also plan to develop a virtual tour of our story, displays and exhibits, and digital and print materials that can be used for teaching, training, leisure reading, and hosting events related to enslavement and the many paths of freedom that took place in our region. So coupled with the Appalachian Freedom Heritage Tour that I've been talking about, where the work is already in motion in 4 West Virginia and Kentucky counties and 5 Ohio counties along the Ohio River, we envision that the entrepreneurial economy from our project through the cultural heritage, tourism, and outdoor recreation sector is an opportunity to offset some of these historical job losses that we had from the downturn of the coal mining industry. And so this project is being administered, or the project administrator is, through the leadership of David Butcher, Executive Director of the Tablertown People of Color Museum. And what that means is he is the man holder of the grant. And then I have been directing the different aspects of it and kind of pulling everything together for us for working on this project. And Rural Action of Ohio is acting as our grant management and fiscal agent. And then our 5 regional partners include the Cutler Heritage and Legacy Society in Washington County, the Multicultural Genealogical Center in Morgan County, the Renville Historic Preservation Society in Perry County, the Vinton County Economic Development Office, and the Jackson County Board of Tourism. And we just received news, it hasn't even been a month ago, that it was announced that we received these grants. So we're currently seeking a consultant that has knowledge and experience in Underground Railroad history, research methodologies, and site interpretation, and developing recommendations of Underground Railroad sites in the area that would likely get approval for the National Park Service's Network to Freedom Marker program. And so that's kind of like the Underground Railroad or cultural aspect of it. And then we need someone that has like a business aspect as well. So providing strategic planning support for nonprofits, someone who has experience in capacity building tools and has created near and long-term nonprofit goals and actions, someone who has regional travel tourism economies and has generated entrepreneurship opportunities. They have a proven ability to manage complex projects with tight deadlines, adhering to budget constraints, and they have excellent written and verbal communication skills to effectively present findings and engage with diverse stakeholders. So if you or someone you know who has these skills, please refer them to the request for proposals on our website. And that's at tablertownmuseum.org/public notices. So if you go to tablertownmuseum.org and then at the top there's a tab that says public notices, and that's where it's listed. The deadline for this is 4:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, November 26th. And any questions can be directed towards me, which is at my email is dr.amanda.m.flowers@gmail.com. And so the Tablertown People of Color Museum is doing big things. And we've been working hard to develop plans and apply for financial support. It is impossible to do this on grants alone. I mean, we need to pay somebody to help do the grants, sometime, and we don't have the money to do that. So I just want to say we're appreciative of everyone who's donating today, and we kindly ask that you spread the words to others to donate. You can go to our website or other people can go to our website and make donations as well. And this is our history. And I'm here to tell you, no one is going to tell our stories except for us. And as a matter of fact, if they can stop, we may face some challenges with telling our stories here in the near future. So we all need to be a part of that storytelling and pressing forward and trying to help this get out there. So thank you guys so much.
Presentation, Dr. Flowers.
Thank you.
This may be the chance. Hey, happy so high. Any questions? Please, now is a good time. I mean, this is the cheapest doctor you're ever going to see. Bob has a question.
I have two questions, and they're not directly related to the museum, but they are about the history in this area. Do you know anything about Africa Street, which is now Depot Street in Athens?
I don't. Do you, David?
No.
Okay, so it's down by the old train station, and I saw on an old map, and I can't find that map again, but I think I found it online, and it was labeled Africa Street, and I think it was Tom Brady who said it was a pathway across the Hocking River to go up the hill there behind what is now Bromley Hall. So anyway, I just wondered if you knew about that. And I also wonder how much, I think a lot of people don't know about the Ohio black laws. And I'm not sure, you may have mentioned something about it, but I just wonder if that history of the black laws is sort of dovetails into the period of, let's say, the first half of the 19th century.
Probably. Now, see, that would be, so we definitely want to learn about that. This is more the stories of enslavement to freedom, which was all in the 1800s. So I haven't mentioned any of that in this, since that was more in the Reconstruction era. But yes, Ohio did have some black laws. A lot of people don't realize, the North was not the greatest place in the world everywhere you went. They didn't like us here either. You had some who were nice. There were some people in the South that were nice and liked it and didn't agree with it either. But we had sundown towns very close to here. There were sundown towns. And I mean, if you were black and caught in them, they would hang you. So Ohio wasn't always great. And you got to think about where the Ohio River is, where they were either crossing over from Kentucky or West Virginia. And not to offend any people because I have family from West Virginia, but we do know that those are two of the most racist places around here. And we were talking about, in West Virginia, some of them were more treacherous than they were down south when they were on the plantations. So, there were some great people ready to get them as they crossed over the river, but there were also some people who were ready to snatch them and take them back to their plantations too. So it was really a risky journey for them. And I'm sorry I got sidetracked from what you were saying, but did you have something you wanted to say about the black laws?
Well, just that I think there was like a bounty, there were bounty hunters, who would get $1,000 a head for runaway slaves. So there was a big incentive to turn former slaves back over to a lot of money.
Okay. And you know what? I apologize then because I was speaking of something different because you were talking about directly with the Underground Railroad. So we'll make sure we look into that as well. Thank you.
And let's remember they weren't just after runaways. Anybody that was a person of color, they could capture, take across that river and sell for more money than they could ever make in a lifetime farming. Everybody was at risk.
Yeah.
And you had to have a certificate of freedom, I think.
It didn't mean much if they tore it up. And just to add to Dr. Flowers talking about segregation in the South and how it wasn't so great here. My mom here was born in 1938 in Utley and Armadale. It's still debatable. It was a coal mining town. Her first movie she ever saw was in Chester Hill, Ohio. And they were forced to sit in the balcony, right? So we had segregation, but we didn't have all the signs, but everybody knew. We also, the skating ring was a certain day of the week you could go to the skating ring, So we had segregation here, but it was just, we didn't have the signs. Any more questions?
David, I want to tell something that piggybacks off what you said. You'll appreciate this story. My grandpa, I don't know if any of you knew my grandpa, Billy Mayo, but my mom tells this story about him when, and I don't know how old she was or he was at this age, but she was grown. And they were going to Marietta, and she asked him, did he want to eat at some restaurant? And he was like, oh no, we can't go there, because he was used to when the signs were hung up and black people couldn't go there to eat. And she's, kind of threw her off because she hadn't experienced that. But it's just like, wow, my grandpa, lived through that, because they make it seem like these things were so long ago, and that was my grandpa. Now my grandma, she lived, I don't remember where she lived. It was somewhere, Virginia or one of the Carolinas, and she had some friends who were darker skinned than what she was. And when they went into the theater, they were sending the friends to the balcony, and they were going to have her sit on the floor. And she was like, oh no, I'm sitting with my friends. And the friends was like, oh, be quiet, they'll treat you, better. But she wasn't going through it. So, it's just, Miss Desi is right here, and then my grandparents, I'm sure, were about your age as well. But just to think, these are things that people were going through in our lifetimes. It wasn't that far, long ago.